Imagine, if you will, you stumble across a channel where the content creator has completely lost control of his life and potentially his own mind. Now imagine you start watching a video over one of the most money laundering schemes known to man, right next to Velocipaster.
No.
You open your eyes. You're not imagining this, it's real life. You didn't want this. You didn't choose this. But luckily, some douche on the internet made this popular. Nah, I'm sure he's a cool guy. In the great state of Hawaii, that this movie will have you believe is really just a small uninhabited island that nobody knows about for some reason, things are looking rather Jurassic Parky if 45 tons of crack were released into the water supply. As a film is taking place inside of a film, how meta, an animal would start stalking the rivers that run nearby. Able to move faster than a fleeing minivan, but not swim faster than a boat going 5 miles per hour, a hybridized creature would begin stalking and taking out people left, right, and center. As a small group of inept defenders begin to realize that something is hunting everyone, eventually they attempt to take the fight to the creature itself. But the question still remains, what exactly is this thing? How did it come about? And shouldn't it be completely hindered by its own size? Well, I'm glad you asked all those questions because what in the name of all is holy is this movie? So today, let's cover Piranhaconda and try to discern, if anything, how this creature even came into being. But first, this episode is sponsored by Opera GX. Break up with your boring browser and download Opera GX today by going to operagx.gg/Roanoke or click the link in the description box below. Opera has been innovating the browser space for over 25 years at this point and was built by bringing together exceptional international teams of developers, coders, researchers, marketers, and support. I did an integration actually a while back with Opera GX, I think in January, I believe, and since then I have personally switched over from Chrome to Opera. Like, it wasn't even intentional, I just saw like the extra features and I was hooked. For instance, mod music playing in the background of my browser whenever I use it, dedicated themes and colorings as well as wallpapers, and then tab closing sounds to alert me whenever I inadvertently accidentally close one, and I also can like enable and disable these at will. And now Opera has new features, Opera GX's generative AI integration. The prompts help you summarize an entire article, find related content, or shorten a text, and potentially even just flat out do your homework for you, though you should be doing that yourself. It's all accessible when you highlight text or directly from the address bar. It also has ChatGPT on the sidebar. With just one click, you can initiate a conversation with the AI to help you generate ideas, summaries, or itineraries as we come closer and closer to being assimilated into the Matrix. You can also find the Chat Sonic on the sidebar, which will help enable image generation. All of this on the same great browser that can run in the background, so like you play video games and it's not really a problem. So if you're ready to break up with your boring browser today, download Opera GX by going to operagx.gg/Roanoke and start enjoying an awesome browser today. All right, let's get back to it. We kick off our story today with the understanding that this has to be the most ridiculous thing to date I have ever covered on this channel. As we zoom into Earth, some anemic rock music starts playing. I'm pretty sure these are the same islands from Jurassic Park, like there's no way it's not, and I have a theory about this, and it involves unused footage from Jurassic Park that the copyright doesn't exist for. See, that's the beach where the youngling was eaten. This song was also made specifically for this movie. Absolute mad lads. As a helicopter flies through, a guy then points down to the same field where they definitely didn't film chasing down dinosaurs and capturing them, and this has to be on purpose. Also, this is future Roanoke. It's totally on purpose. This movie is legitimately unhinged. As the group gets out, they tell the pilot to stay there and that they will be right back, as it really almost turns into a you go that way, I'll go home scenario. And something tells me I don't believe they'll actually be coming back. So they approach a dirty stream as we jump over to a frog just sort of vibing out for a few minutes. Okay then, this is also like prawn levels of acting, and I'm 100% here for it. As they find eggs, Lisa Ann then says, "They were right, we found the eggs." As the Aussie Intimidator, or as I like to call him, the non-clever girl, approaches the waterfall, they continue filming the eggs. The professor pulls out a literal food storage container, which I have this exact one in my pantry right now, as they hear something splash in the water. NCG gets almost immediately got as he's turned into a blood cloud, with Lisa Ann next up on the list. No, haha, don't get eaten, you're so pretty. The pilot then hears the yells and growls, and he decides, yeah, I'm getting out of here, as he gets the chopper up and running as the Piranhaconda is inbound. Heroically leaving, he decides to hover, rather than, ascending and getting out of there, as the Piranhaconda attacks the helicopter, destroying it, leaving the last guy to just sort of like annoyingly rub his face. What? How did you survive? He was right there with everyone else. And as we will find out, the egg is sort of important. So after more stock footage of flying over Dinosaur Island with the music telling us, let me out, this is not a dance, we now meet the yellow bikini walking through the woods, affectionately known as blonde victim number 3. Bruce calls out to her and asks if she's about to go swimming as she sees something rustling in the bushes. Bruce then hangs up as this dude in a mask just randomly appears. So She recognizes the machete man and then runs off. Again, this whole movie is just the intro plot to an internet movie. So the guy is also kind of like keeping up with her somehow by slowly lumbering forward, which is pretty impressive. He then hides behind a bush as he appears behind her. They call cut as the director tells them, "This was terrible." Yes, I would tend to agree with this one. Rose then hands her call sheet for tomorrow, 5 a.m. baby. So Mr. Handsome Stuntman approaches Rose and then starts hitting on her, as one does, as they agree to go to the bar at 5 today with a 5 a.m. wake-up call, which is always a recipe for disaster if you want to drink with women, because the problem is if you hit it off, you're like, oh yeah, we'll go for like a drink or two. You never go for a drink or two. It's like 8 hours later, it's 3 a.m. and you're like, whoops. So yeah, anyways, Stuntman then approaches someone sitting over in the white minivan. As Rose reviews the scripts, blonde victim number 2 approaches the water looking for the cell phone prop. And looky there, Piranhaconda approaches and somehow she does not see this thing morphing in her periffs at all. It spits all over her, which I'm pretty sure was intentional in this movie, as she takes off running, as then it bites her leg off, as she literally forgets to emote that her leg loss had just happened until several seconds later. It really is a thing of beauty, this movie. Eventually though, it does grab her and blood clouds her as well. So as we watch a seagull eat a crab for some reason, we are over at the resort. Someone is in the background, they're screaming about Dotson, we got Dotson here. But nobody really cares because that's irrelevant to the Piranhaconda plot. Stuntman extraordinaire met up with Rose as he orders some more drinks. She's more focused on work, how dare she, as he does the smolder on her, and again, the smolder works. But you can't just go smoldering all the time, otherwise you'll just look like a complete dork. There's very specific instances, like when you say something stupid, that's when you hit the date with it. So she tells them about how creatures are living in the waters, the river devils. One was spotted last week, and she says she believes it as future blonde victim number 3 asks the stuntman to come put some sunblock on her. Now you're probably wondering what happened to blonde victim number 1. Due to budget constraints, she was cut from the movie. So Mr. Suave then walks over and he puts absolutely nothing on her back. He really has taken a hot minute to do this, like over 10 minutes, some would suggest, as Rose continues to look at a giant snake. On the computer, you know, that snake. It's phrasing. So now we need another random woman pulling up to the dock. I'm sure everyone has names, but if the plot is basically at the level of prawn, I'm sorry, names must be attributed to that level as well. I don't make the rules, I just work here. I'm really starting to wonder who actually makes the rules around here. So she heads over to the waterfall and then starts stripping. Heading into the water, she did leave her pants on. It's not a weird thing, it's just I didn't expect this movie to use any amount of restraint. As then she looks up and we get this chef's kiss blocking maneuver as someone who's most definitely scared and a professional, as she's immediately then eaten. Blood drains down the river, most certainly not from compies attacking the lead singer of Rammstein though. Why do you ask? So we now meet this random dude, super excited about future blonde victim number 3. He then tells his girlfriend or wife or caretaker, or whoever she is, blonde victim number 5, whatever she is, I don't know, that he will be right back. And then all he does is just roll over. Why did you say that? Also, why are you wearing tennis shoes and socks at the pool? Coincidentally, he also owns a Corvette. Also, the woman next to him, she's wearing like for real high heels, like the ones you either bust out for dates, the club, or home for reasons. Yes, the interaction is very human. This movie feels like it was made by aliens who saw a movie Anaconda and then wanted to see if humanity would notice if they made a movie. I noticed. So he asked her if she's the woman that he thinks she is, as a stuntman is still there rubbing sunblock on her like half an hour later. My man, you said you'd be gone for just a minute. So this dude's girlfriend is pretty upset as the guy goes to get a picture with the whole squad, but as they do, Stuntman then douches out as finally his brain made the connection that he was supposed to be hitting on Rose the whole time, and he only made that realization during when they were taking the picture. This man's sense of timing is something wild. Jumping over to a Spanish guy in a tank top, he says that they are all there as the stuntman then goes to talk to Rose, but she walks off. This activated a really old memory of this happening to me as well. Spring break 2012, man, what a time. And then I had to ride back to Birmingham, Alabama, all the way from Panama City with this girl in complete silence. Tried turning on the radio, she turned it off. Let me tell you guys, wonderful learning experience. At a random factory where a fight between a T-Rex and a raptor definitely didn't take place, the guy from earlier who found the eggs climbs into a dump truck. Not immediately finding keys, he then gives up as a new woman approaches, brandishing a pellet dispenser. Blonde victim number 6 tells him to move, as he's then brought over to the Timu version of the Mafia. Is that joke getting old yet? Probably, but we must persist. They then give him a chair to sit in, how nice of them. He's a professor of herpetology, and he tells them about the creature out there in the jungle. The leader immediately references what he's talking about and then laughs at him. The professor goes on to say it's an evolutionary mutation. Essentially, they plan on kidnapping the professor though, so he's now officially to be a ransom as he's then brought into the factory. So I guess he just sort of hangs out. Also, this group just loves ransoming people. This is their shtick. I have no idea why. Loading up the hardest of vehicles, the minivan, blonde victim number 6 decides to look in the case and finds the egg covered in green goo. Technically speaking, it's jello, but you get the point. So anywho, we jump over to another group of women out on a hike. I wonder what's about to happen to them. They're talking about a flower and its rejuvenation properties, and as they walk, the lead woman hears growling. She says, oh, everything's okay, like she's supposed to know. I mean, I suppose it is Hawaii, not exactly a lot of man-eating predators over there. So they continue their search as they find ghost orchids. Leilani then nopes out of there completely uninterested in what they're doing as they cut away the flower. They then hear a scream as they call out to her. They go back for the flowers because research over living, you know, as the Piranhaconda then coils around them. And then just straight blood clouds both of them. This thing is racking up a body count like you would not believe. And all it eats apparently are hot women. Well, except for those 2 guys at the beginning, so hot women and 2 guys. Someone get dead meat in here to watch this so we can figure out exactly how many people get taken out. So Stuntman then apologizes to Rose for rubbing sunblock on blonde victim number 13 for 14.5 minutes, but it had to be done. Has that ever worked in the history of man? Not for me, but evidently yes for him. Rose then forgives him as they are 40 minutes late. The director tells them blonde victim number 2, affectionately known as Deb, never showed up for work that day. The director gives them direction, it's his job, as they are supposed to begin acting at some point, which they probably needed more of that for this movie. Stuntman then puts on a mask as they start filming. I mean, do I even really need to explain this? It puts off a very strange vibe, like something's about to fall out at any minute now. So the director then gets a call as Rachel wanders out into the woods to practice her lines. As she fake screams, she then sees the Piranhaconda. It goes after her as she keeps stopping to look at it. You know, just a bit of advice, never stop to look at your pursuant, just run. She then heads deeper into the jungle as it cuts her off and she just sort of sits there. There are 2 of these things now. So we have seen these things several times, which brings into question several points. First and foremost, this doesn't make any sense. As will be made known later, like the professor considers these to be a genetic freak of nature, an evolutionary line jumper, but really it appears to be more of a hybridized version of 2 animals together. And as we will see, there are piranhas in the stream along with the snakes, but this still would not explain the size of the creature. So to establish our first basis, we need to discuss the size of a snake for a moment. Phrasing. The only thing even remotely comparable to this creature would be everyone's favorite nightmare fuel, Titanoboa. This snake, while having evolved after the extinction of the dinosaurs, typically ate lungfish as well as other snakes, crocodiles, turtles, birds, and any mammal that was dumb or unlucky enough to cross its path. Thankfully, Homo sapiens probably would have no we didn't have any interaction with these things because we weren't really hanging out during this time period, but still, absolute nightmare fuel. The Titanoboa is hypothesized based on the skeletons to have been roughly around 43 feet long, or around 13 meters, and weigh somewhere about 1.25 tons, or around 1,135 kilograms. This absolute behemoth of a snake, could very likely swallow you entirely in one fell swoop, with very little issue if you were to run across it. But even as powerful as this creature was, it had one critical flaw that all snakes have: their inability to regulate their temperature themselves. During the time frame that Titanoboa actually lived, temperatures across the planet were roughly about 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than they are currently. Because Hawaii itself is not some microclimate of isolated heat, just completely different from the rest of the planet because it is a part of the planet, this would seem to indicate that something else is going on concerning the size of the snake and the heights it has reached, which we will talk about here momentarily when we get to talking about hybrid animals. Over at the, I'm assuming the same minivan from earlier, could be wrong, Stunt Boy then starts talking to Gunner about the concussive force detonators. The director says they are shutting down the project as the studio has backed out. This movie feels like it was just a cover so that a bunch of people could go to Hawaii and potentially launder some money, which actually, this is literally what Adam Sandler does. Not the money laundering, because I don't want to get sued, but he gets his friends together, goes and makes a movie in some paradise, and then they get millions of dollars and call it a day. That's the literal dream. So the dude from earlier has his girlfriend angry at him now, and the girlfriend, of course, being blonde victim number 5. He says that they are going to head to the north side of the island that is uninhabited, and I don't really know much enough about Hawaii to make a statement on if that's true or not. So someone from Hawaii, is that for real? So driving away from the studio in the only car available, white minivans, they come across something they have never seen before: a black Jeep. The Wish expendable from earlier is working on said Jeep as he pulls out a force multiplier on them as, oh psych, it was an ambush. As the FaZe clan then lines them up, they randomly fire a shot at the director's foot. Bro, I mean, I think it's a little over the top. He didn't even do anything. So okay, One of the things you should know is this guy's accent has changed like 4 times in this movie. He starts spouting off about how they work for a movie studio and that makes them rich. So again, they're just kidnapping people and holding them for ransom on an island that they could definitely be found on. Good luck with that, y'all. I mean, it's Hawaii. It's not a lawless wasteland. So Gunnar then throws some blasting caps at the ground that scares the kidnappers as him and the stuntmen heroically make a break for it. You see, they aren't retreating, they're simply advancing in another direction, leaving the women and wounded behind. Heroic AF. Meanwhile, the dynamic duo are continuing to hike unaware of the situation unfolding relatively close to them. Stuntman and Gunnar then split up as Faye's clan continues to go after them. Gunnar then hits one dude in the head with a stick, what an absolute Chad, as the other guy randomly fires into the water on the stuntman. Luckily though, Piranhaconda takes him out as he's blood clouded as well. So the couple continues walking as they hear something but just decide to completely ignore it. So she commits assault for like the 2nd time, as then we move back over to Timu Cartel. They ask where the other guy in their group went, as they decide to then take their hostages to see their boss. I actually have the shirt that inferior team lead here is wearing, and as he checks the camera, he sees the creature. Back over at the couple, wait, did this woman really wear heels on a hike? I mean, admirable, I suppose. So they run out to the water, almost guaranteed to get frisky on a beach, which in theory sounds like a great idea, right? In practice, it's horrible. Sand gets everywhere, and into everything, and it's coarse, and I don't like sand. But back over at the cartel hidey hole, they then hand their boss the camera as team lead tries to tell him about what he saw. The boss then takes the handheld and pistol whips the man in the face, which is, kinda crappy. The beatings will continue until morale improves. Back over at the beach, the subplot of the couple is highly important, I assure you. The guy then gets up to go pee as she goes back out into the water. Peeing on a tree, he hears growling, and then turning around, he's blood clouded as well. This movie is a fever dream. And again, how did this thing not see her? She was like 4 steps away. This creature works very peculiarly in how it attacks. So as the newly widowed woman then calls out for him, he doesn't answer because he's sitting in a snake's stomach right now. But back over at the factory, they bring in the others with the professor as the professor makes this weird comment. He's like, oh, one big happy family. Why exactly? Like, why did you say this? Nobody knows. They are complete strangers to you, my brother in Christ. So they end up showing superior team lead the beginning of the movie, which greatly disturbs everyone, myself included, because they literally just use shot for shot at the beginning of the movie. So they see the creatures as well and how it just meat pasted a dude. They realize the professor was telling the truth as they watch it for then a 3rd time as team lead then runs off at this point. Going to the car, he then pulls out the container, which the jello has the egg in it, out of the car, as American Eagle shirt suggests it's an unholy union, a piranha, an anaconda, as he's corrected. Blonde victim number 6 calls it a Piranhaconda. Stuntman now approaches the white minivan as it doesn't turn over. Gunnar shows up and says they took the distributor cap. Bro, they did not take the distributor cap. Distributor caps started being phased out 40 years ago at this point. Modern cars do not have distributor caps, they have coil packs. I love this movie. Stuntman then rightly deduces as they follow the tracks that they're looking for trouble. He informs Gunnar about the things that he has never heard before, as Gunnar then plans on coming back with everything he's got. Or just call the cops, I don't know. I feel like they would probably show up to this area. Over at a factory, completely unguarded, they then talk about how MGM bought their studio. They have deep pockets. And I felt that, because they copyright hit me every chance they get. $10 says, I don't even know if MGM owns this, but they're gonna hit this video because I brought it up. So canonically speaking, I would be paying part of their ransom. I'm doing my part. Rose then starts asking the professor about what he's doing here in the first place as he starts talking about the oil company his dad worked for and how they went into the jungle and then never came out. A tour group then disappeared 2 weeks ago, which caught his attention. He says something is in the river as blonde victim number 3 asks, just completely dead face, are you on crack? Like an actual real reaction to this news. That wasn't that's not acting. Or maybe that's how good her acting is, I don't know. So the film crew is then brought out to the surface as Lizard Man is left in the hidey hole. They're filming the group to show that they are still alive. Luckily, team lead has a very distinguishable beard that would be easily recognizable, so you typically don't want facial hair when you record these things, I would assume. I don't record these things. Also, once again, I have to stress, Hawaii isn't a lawless wasteland. What is happening here? So Rose then says that she has to go pee as she and American Eagle walk off. She then makes a pass at the dude for promised safety. It's one of the 3 F's in terms of dealing with dangerous situation. You have fight, freeze, and fawn. It's fawn. So she knees him in the crotch as she runs off, and it was all a ruse to go with the first F, which is fight. The random dude with a machete wearing a mask then goes after her. Picking Death Creek in which to run wouldn't have been more intelligent to probably stick to the bank, but as she has a nice cry while running, she then hides, but she kind of then runs off from her hiding spot. Like, it was probably a pretty good spot. What are you doing? So as he continues to chase, Rose has the stamina of a newborn turtle, but somehow the dude just keeps catching up with her, even though he's like lumbering and cutting down everything in his path. She ends up falling and realizing that she's surrounded by eggs. Now, something to know about this, which is just an interesting factoid for you, only about 70% of snakes actually lay eggs. The other 30% typically reside in colder climates, and as a result, the eggs really would not survive those temperatures, which is why they give live birth. Now, this is Hawaii, so it would stand to reason that the Piranhaconda could evolutionarily be predispositioned towards laying eggs due to the higher temperatures because it is closer to the equator. But again, I have to stress, these temperatures are not high enough for this creature to naturally exist or even survive in the first place at the size that it is, because what is it eating that would provide enough nutrition for this thing to get as big as it is? So while that stupid chase is going on, Team Lead is getting his beard shaved and also insulting blonde victim number 6 who's holding a knife to his neck. Good thinking, brother. Operation cannot possibly go wrong a second time, engage. So he then starts making out with her, as one does, but gets a call. Inferior Team Lead calls Superior Team Lead to tell him Rose escaped. Meanwhile, Rose is touching the eggs, like the gross eggs, rather than running, and she's kind of wiping it on herself. I don't know what's happening, stop that. But as she lays there, Piranhaconda shows up and immediately blood clouds the guy chasing her. So Rose then finds the strength to run away, somehow outrunning this thing, which makes no sense. And then back over at Paradise Camp, Rose comes running back to the squad, telling them that the thing is out there. I mean, you could literally have just run anywhere else. You outran this thing, so why back to them? So the gruesome twosome now arrive to launch what is sure to be a botched rescue mission, and that was really hard to say for some reason, as the real hero, at least according to my prediction, will be Piranhaconda. So Inferior Team Lead then throws Rose back into the factory as she confirms there is something else out there. The professor says, "It's an evolutionary line jumper, a mutation that seems to have happened from nowhere." Yes, that totally makes sense. Like, usually mutations like this really do happen. And according to Reddit, when I sound like that, everybody thinks I'm some sort of jackass, so let the hate comments flow, I suppose. So blonde victim number 3 then tells them they are cuckoo for psychopuffs, which I will absolutely be using that phrase in the future, and he suggests maybe it's been hiding. Rose then pulls some of the goo off her chest. Wait, no, YouTube mods, it's not what you Alright, so this genetic line jumper question, what exactly does that mean? Well, for starters, clearly there are several differences with Piranhaconda that are not seen naturally in comparison with other snakes. First, the size for starters. The creature is much larger than what should naturally be allowed with the temperatures at the current level they are, as this would not support the size of this animal along with the facial changes. This is going to involve a few events to come together that, look, I'm not gonna sit here and insult your intelligence. You're pretty smart. None of this would make any sense, but bear with me, it's all for fun. The movie is Piranhaconda after all. Something to note about piranhas in Hawaii is that while one was found in a reservoir, there is nothing to suggest that they are actually an established species within the rivers. So the unique set of circumstances are as follows, potentially. Piranha are an egg-laying species. Much like any other fish, the female will lay up to roughly 5,000 eggs in the water, which are then fertilized by a male out in the open. This is the critical point where I believe potentially a crossover fertilization event must have happened in the past. Piranhas are known to mate between the months of December and March, or essentially the rainy seasons. There is a small window of overlap between the points when snakes mate and piranhas mate. This causes them to potentially have an interaction inadvertently due to proximity. And of course, snakes will typically try to mate during spring, especially in colder climates, because they're going to be more active. What I see happening, or at least having happened, would have to be that two snakes may have been near the beginning of their own mating cycle in Hawaii because it's warmer, and the piranhas were on the tail end of theirs. At some point, genetic material would have been released into the water during the snake's mating that entered the piranha egg. Now, the issue with hybridization of animals, before you even click off, like, I get it, man. I'm a biologist. Yeah, this wouldn't happen at all, but let's just have fun with it, I guess. This process is not viable. For instance, humans cannot mate with other primates and create young, and that's even within, like, they're primates like us. This is known as prezygotic and postzygotic barriers. This is essentially going to create a wall that stops different species from mating to produce fertile offspring or even viable offspring, and this can happen before the zygote is fertilized or even after, but the result is the same. The zygote either never exists in the first place or becomes non-viable shortly after due to the issue of genes not coding for functionality and also differentiation correctly. Strangely enough, turns out you need two of the same species to provide that information necessary to make a coherent animal. You can kind of think of it like reading a recipe for something, right? Every other word is provided, so to speak, by the two parents. So like word 1, mom, word 2, dad, word 3, mom, and it just goes so on and so forth. This guides the cell on how to divide, differentiate, appear, and function, and essentially where it's supposed to be. When one parent is, say, like a shrew and the other is a bald eagle, the words are telling the cell to do all of the aforementioned, but every other word is different and it just creates indiscernible gibberish. As a result, the zygote would never even survive, and it's also possible the sperm might not even be able to break through the egg wall. But there are some crossovers to this, however, and it's usually with species that are more closely linked. Take a donkey and a zebra, for instance. Genetically, they are close enough to create viable young, known as zonkies, or somebody said z-donk one time, like, what the hell is that? Like, no, it's not a z-donk, it's a zonky. Or a tiger and a lion. Genetically, they are close enough to create a massive animal known as a liger, which is bigger than both parents. The ligers, however, are typically sterile from what we have found, as meiosis is a complicated process, and the sex cells are rendered non-functional as a result. And remember, mitosis are for somatic cells, those are you. Meiosis are for sex cells, those are sperm and eggs. You think it would be the other way around, like, me being meiosis. I know, it's weird, right? Well, I guess it's like you're passing along genetic me to somebody else, so meiosis. It's a good way to look at it. Perfect. Yes, remember that. You're passing along genetic me, meiosis. All right, but what do I want to focus on, however, is basically the idea of how much larger the animal is, and you can kind of see where I'm going with this. To this end, we need to know if there are snakes in Hawaii, which natively, no, there are not. However, snakes are brought in from time to time by humans, which is what we love to do. Like, look no further than the war taking place in the Everglades right now as the Burmese pythons compete with the American alligators for top predator, consistently eating one another because after someone released a few of these pythons out there, I think several decades ago, it's been an issue ever since. Ergo, it's not too far-fetched to think that this could happen with an anaconda in Hawaii. Someone simply had a few of these snakes and they became too large, potentially even reaching their maximum size of 30 feet or 9 meters. They then established themselves within the rivers, which is what anacondas do in the first place, which would then track potentially with how the fertilization event may have inadvertently happened in the first place between a piranha egg and an anaconda. Now again, as far as we know, snakes are not able to reproduce with a fish. And look, again, I'm really trying here, but the viability of this creature is a major concern. The only thing that would even make remote sense is if this is somehow just a gigantic species on its own and it has existed with piranhas and then for some reason mimicry was inspired in it and it was able to take on some of the traits naturally, not through reproduction, but just by its own genes changing, again, through mimicry. In fact, we see this, I believe it's with red, black, and yellow snake, and then the yellow, red, and black snake, like the coral snake, and I'm forgetting the other snake's name. Can you put it up on screen, editor, of like those two? Basically, it's mimicry. They look the same, but they're not the same. So also, how would these things be able to reproduce? Suspension of disbelief can only go so far. Biologically, this thing should not exist. It cannot exist. So why? Once again, apart from the barriers created, the genetics, as mentioned, will not line up, so this cannot happen. But screw it. We're doing it live. Upon the egg being fertilized, let's pretend not only could it survive, but now there is coding for 2 sets of genes that are talking about essentially how much it's gonna weigh, what it's supposed to look like, and how large it is. This is congruent coding, and it may push for the anaconda from the 30 feet, given that the maximum of its length is typically gonna be that, housed within the anaconda genes, to well over 50 feet, given that the piranha coding may be impacting this differentiating factor and growth as well. Building off one another, this pushes a snake to be much larger than normal, and along with that result in phenotypic traits on its head. Because remember, the lion and the tiger, how is the liger bigger than both? Both of those sets of genes are only coding for an animal that should be roughly about the same size as them. But sometimes when that happens, boom, it just creates a larger animal. But back to its head. This has resulted in the mouth being similar to a snake, but the teeth have grown in as a piranha's would. This has created a crest on the top of its head as well that may also have influenced its hunting patterns and aggressive nature. As we all know, snakes are typically not majorly aggressive and prefer to lie in wait for their prey. They will hunt, absolutely, but usually they do not behave in this manner. Piranha, however, are quite aggressive when prey is nearby, and this is clearly displayed by Piranhaconda. As the name suggests, this creature would have to be a hybrid of both and not just a random mutation as suggested by the professor. The reasoning is, how would all of these traits even form? If it was just one genetic freak, that makes sense, but 2 genetic freaks? That's an establishing population of traits being passed down from a predecessor. Okay, so enough with the mental gymnastics. So Stuntman then straight up breaks a dude's neck, good lord, former Marine I suppose, as Gunner then runs around setting charges as the Stuntman starts just taking out dudes, alerting both superior and inferior team lead. Stuntman then starts stacking bodies left, right, and center as Rose is super jazzed to see him. We might need to explain the goo on her chest thing later, but Gunner then runs to the only white minivan, as they still had the rental rights to it, for the weekend at least, as they try to make their escape. Stuntman then calls them SUVs for some reason, and like, look, a 3rd gen 4Runner is an SUV. Those are minivans. Milo then says that he will sacrifice himself because his foot is hurt. Bruh, just push through for like 4 seconds. You've been walking the whole time. He then, like, as the attack starts, he runs out of cover to attack. Like, bro, you could have just joined them. So now a ton of team members come out of nowhere as a firefight ensues. A growl can then be heard. They start firing on the Piranhaconda as that looks totally natural and real as everyone's face shows a generalized boredom and malaise as blonde victim number 6 gets bitten in half as Gunner gets hit by a round. So rather than check on him, Stuntman just nopes out of there with the Piranhaconda hot on their tail while the superior team lead chases them on a 4-wheeler. The professor tells them what they just saw the whole time. It's a hyper-accelerated growth freak. Seriously, you think? I don't know. Maybe some of the adjectives to describe this thing are just kind of throwing me off. But aren't you a professor of herpetology? Shouldn't you have like something in your arsenal about like, oh yes, well, the snake's growth pattern is, I don't know why I sound like Sean Connery, and it doesn't matter. So yes, that's really going to explain what's on their tail. Well, maybe. The van also appears to be outpacing this thing, and they keep talking about it chasing them, and you don't even see it in the background. Like, did they forget to render it in? I don't know. Oh, but there it is, sort of. The Stuntman then is required to stop as it moves in front of them. So, with it just sort of sitting there, Superior Team Lead then shows up. Grabbing, I mean, what is that? According to my Call of Duty knowledge, I think it's a LAW or something. Somebody's gonna tell me what that actually is in the comments. He hits the Piranhaconda, injuring it, and as it's injured, the other one comes up and just attacks it. Well, alright then. I'm going to assume this aggression comes from the piranha genetics, as during a feeding frenzy, it is known that piranha will actually bite one another by accident, and once blood is tasted, they will start to devour each other as a result. Friends like these, am I right? Anyhow, the minivan is almost out of gas as well. As it does run out of gas, they realize a bullet has hit the tank. The professor then talks about the marina out in the jungle that they need to follow the river south. Back over at the evil version of the Wish Expendables, they agree to go after everyone now because the monster is allegedly gone. Superior Team Lead ignores Inferior Team Lead as they agree to continue their hunt. Meanwhile, the director has started his walk out of the area because he's like, oh, well, I guess I survived. I'm pretty sure there were people still like firing on him, right? But as he looks up, he smiles. Seeing a girl on the beach from earlier, we know that her boyfriend or husband or whatever is gone as she calls him on the phone, and you have got to be kidding me. It is the same ringtone from Jurassic Park 3 when the Spinosaurus like ate that guy and it's in its stomach. Like, so she hangs up the phone as Mr. Director comes hobbling out. She asks what happened to him as he tells her he hurt his foot. So the director then explains to her it's not the jungle eating people, it's a creature. The woman is wearing wedges on the beach again as she tells him, you need help. I think you both might need help. So she runs off looking for her boyfriend as he hobbles after her. Heading into the jungle, she keeps calling him as unsettling music plays, or at least that's what the subtitles tell me. Sounds a little more whimsical than unsettling to me. So the other squad keep walking as blonde victim number 3 needs water. And you'll hold up. If you look in the back, there's an actual wooden path behind them. You can just barely see it, but it's totally there. It's a walkway. So Stuntman then gives Rose his shirt, anything to pop the guns out. You know what I'm saying? Drives the ladies wild, suns out, guns out. I'm totally getting demonetized for saying that. So as half the couple then finds the eggs, for some reason the director starts coughing, because bullet wounds in the foot are known to do that. So she enters the nest, intelligently of course, and intelligently starts looking around. The director tries to tell her that's what the problem is, as he tells her it's its nest. Almost divinely, she figures it out as actually she starts breaking eggs. I mean, hell yeah. The director then gets blood clouded as she goes to attempt to go cave woman on it, but is then bitten in half. Meanwhile, Team Dehydration over here keep looking for the hostages. Team Dehydration because they can't even stop to drink water, according to Team Lead, until they find the hostages. Like, bro, that's a brilliant plan. Okay, so there's this part where blonde victim number 3 says, she's getting in the boat, right? And she's like, I'm gonna make up for everything bad I've ever done if we make it out of this. Which Rose is like, that's a lot, huh? In the most just flat, deadpan reactionary tone in the movie, she just says, bitch. It's like, I almost spit out some water that I was drinking. Like, anyways, the dialogue I find hilarious. So just like Jurassic Park 3, the professor then gets discovered that he had an egg on him. This is Atlantic Rim levels of just theft. Stuntman says that he will go back to the minivans as him and Rose nope out, leaving blonde victim number 3 behind as the professor watches him. As Stuntman gets a trap together to lure the Piranhaconda into a concussive force detonator area, he does the smolder at Rose as the stuntman then gets shot in the shoulder. Ouchies. Superior Team Lead is now angry as the thing took out the only woman he ever loved, which was the stripper, which good luck with that. And somehow taking out these people will help because they caused this. Somehow. I don't know. So yes, this seems like a totally hinged statement and not the ramblings of a madman at all. So as soon as they say it was nothing, well, there it is. It was definitely something. Also, they've all seen it. Why do they say it was nothing? Like, everyone has seen this thing already. Also, that one doesn't even look like the same one. The other Piranhaconda, the one that is alive, had much more yellow on its head, as the professor then goes and grabs the egg and then runs off like a douche canoe as blonde victim number 3 enters the van. Inferior Team Lead then gets eaten as Superior Team Lead is next. Blonde victim number 3 grabs the concussive force detonator as the Piranhaconda begins crushing the van before blood clouding her in there as well. Bummer, bro. So one guy then got spit up somehow, totally stolen from Anaconda, and looks terrible. Oof. So at this point, Stuntman and Rose run. He tells her to get to the boat as Rose then grabs his injured arm, or at least near it, and I'm sure that feels amazing, as then she runs off to the dock with the professor being there as well. Rose then arrives in time to see him slowly starting the boat as she tells him to wait as she says blonde victim number 3 didn't make it, as the professor says, looks like the stuntman didn't as well, because they hear a growl or something like that. Heading down the river is once again part piranha, so I kind of feel like this thing can swim. Stuntman is in fact still alive as he grabs the concussive force detonator and a quad. The professor then tells her to hold on tight as he can feel the snake is near, which, I mean, first phrasing, but they're not really going that fast. And indeed, it is under the water chasing them. She then asks why it's following them. Well, it could be the egg in his bag again, I suppose, but Rose then pulls it out and it just becomes like the slowest, most low energy game of keep away I have ever seen in my life. The professor says, humans are a cheap commodity, but the Piranhaconda isn't, as he gloats about having grabbed the egg that she's still currently holding. She then turns the wheel once she loses it and then just, it knocks him over, but not much apart from that. Like, this whole interaction just, I can't even explain. So as the professor looks over to find the egg, because I guess it fell into the water, Rose pushes him into the water as the Piranhaconda shows up. She grabs the egg out of the water and then leaves him behind as he screams, hey, and then is eaten. I'm assuming she headed back up the river. Meanwhile, Stuntman Extraordinaire somehow runs into Rose, who's now off the boat, as then they nope out of there. Getting on the main road, you can literally see a tour bus in the background. Guess we couldn't do this in 2 shots, could we? So they abandon the quad and then head to the waterfall. As they stand there, it comes up out of the water, growling at them. Stuntman then shows it the egg as they put a concussive force detonator in it, as then they jump in and blow the head off the Piranhaconda. There's still another one, I think. Like, that wasn't even the same one that was attacking y'all earlier. See, it's more yellow. So as they make out, trauma bonded, as all seems well, as they're ready to start their lives together, and they are quickly eaten by the second one, as I knew it was there. Man, I'm good. And thus concludes whatever I've been doing for the last half hour or hour and a half of my life, I guess. The Piranhaconda is one of the most insane things I've ever seen. Biologically, it cannot exist, but for the sake of argument, it just does. This would somehow seem to imply that genetically piranhas and anacondas are at least somewhat compatible concerning their genetics, resulting in typically what can be seen as a hybrid animal being much larger. The traits of each donating parent are clearly displayed, and this is present in the new creature as well, but it is completely different from both sets of parents. What I find most interesting is that this cannot be the first generation. As made mention in the movie, these things appear to have been in folklore for quite some time and then go quiet. This would seem to suggest that potentially a long time ago, when the genetics maybe were more compatible, there was a split that wasn't too far along. And this may have led to basically an interbreeding event, and then for 50 years at a time, they just kind of go quiet and hibernate. But this would then totally take humans out of the equation as the ones who supplied the anaconda, so not our fault. Overall, this makes no sense, but thank you for bearing with me through this thought experiment, and for that, I want to thank you guys, and I want to hear what you guys think. What did you think about this abomination? Like, what is it really? I think it's probably just a snake with mimicry traits, but even then that would not explain the size that it is. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales channel link, where last week we talked about the lost cosmonauts that allegedly a pair of brothers heard on their radios in the 1960s. And speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astrophysicist, Death's Dancer, as well as our scientists, Chad the Enjoyer of Scientific Explanations B-grade horror movies, Dakota23, Jax, Lucian Dragon, Metric System, and Trash Panda in a trench coat. And the rest of my patrons, I appreciate you guys as well. Your help goes a long way towards keeping this channel running and is greatly appreciated, but that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.